Hello, Keith Myers here again, and this is going to be PKB Stickboxing Lesson 1. Hopefully you watched my intro video. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about the length of stick, we're going to leave, when I talk about the stance and all, we're going to leave a little bit of the puño or the butt of the stick showing, because that can be used to strike with and to turn when you're close on the inside. So you want about an inch or two showing. That means if you've got a longer stick, and you know, it can be kind of a liability at close range like I discussed, you can choke up on it, right? Choke up on it so you got more puño sticking out, and you'll find that it moves better if that's the stick you're working with. But realize with a bigger stick, the more you choke up on it to make it work better at close range, then the more puño you have, the more that starts to be a liability that can be caught or the opponent might catch hold of, okay? So just keep that in mind. So anyway, Lesson 1 is going to roughly parallel Lesson 1 for the PKB boxing, the PKB martial boxing. So, first thing we talk about is the guard, okay? Remember from our PKB martial boxing, our guard is like this, hence the PKB designation, right? PKB. When we've got a stick in hand, again, I want to hold it where I got maybe an inch, inch and a half, 2 inches at most of puño sticking out, right? It makes it move better, and I can hit with it. And then when I take my stance, you know, I don't want to stand like this, that stick sticking out there, right? So it's not simply putting up the PKB guard and putting a stick in my hand, right? I have to change it a little bit. So I'm going to turn this way, almost like it's at the side, but still in front. So this stick is just lightly resting on my shoulder, right? And so see, I can still do all the same body movements and all. The stick is right here and it can reach out, pow, real fast, pow. Now, I can also have it on this shoulder, right? So now I've got one hand in front, this hand behind, kind of that same peekaboo position. I can even open this hand like this, right? And I'm just looking out kind of over the top of my hand, so my head and my face is guarded, right? If something was coming at my head, all it takes is a quick to block, right? I'm ready to go. I can move the same we did with our PKB martial boxing stuff, right? So again, here's one guard, here's the other guard. And the transition between the two is just, I just practice just a lift and drop. Lift and drop, lift and drop, lift and drop. And it doesn't matter which leg is forward, lift and drop, lift and drop, lift and drop. So all the footwork and everything we practiced, I could be in a stick guard instead of my empty hand guard and do the exact same things we were working on before. Okay? So that's that basic guard. Now I said that the main strike in the system is going to be an Abaniko, which is a strike with the flat of the stick kind of turning. We're also going to use, you know, strokes through. These are going to be the power shots, which just makes sense. I can hit and then I can power shot, right? Or I can hit this way and then it's a power shot, like a finishing blow. But the main thing we're in close is going to be this rapid back and forth, hitting multiple targets with this fanning motion, which is what we're going to be working on. But let's first talk about power generation. Same power base for the PKB martial boxing. So if you haven't watched that video, remember we used the pivot. I'm standing this way and I'm going to turn without the stick. Remember, I pivot, facing fully that way. My weight's over this leg without leaning out. And then when I pivot, now my weight's over this leg without leaning out. And I let my heel swing forward, right? Without a weapon, I just let my arm swing. See how I got that turn, turn the hip, 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 and I'm up on my toe, my heel going out. Now if I've got my stick, simple way to do it, I just grab my stick. Remember I showed you how to do it with a medicine ball. This is like I'm holding a medicine ball, and I'm going to do the same thing. Pivot, so you turn all the way this way, back this way. Okay? So now, to work the strike, it's not, you see people do it just with their arm and wrist, but my wrist flexibility is limited. See, watch, something is dead center in front of me, and I just try to use my wrist. I'm not really reaching center unless I'm really flexible, right? I have to cross center to strike to center. And besides, if I'm always doing it this way, putting maximum torque on my wrist, eventually my wrist is not going to like that, right? Probably going to get sore and painful, and possibly if I overdo it, I could have an injury, a wrist sprain. So you've got to use entire arm and body action. So if you picture this, my elbow is roughly level with my shoulder, kind of a 90-degree angle right there. So now as I do our pivot, I pivot all the way across. So there's still the wrist action, but now my elbow is coming across here. And then I keep the same shape for now. As I pivot across, I flip my wrist this way. So it goes across, across, across. And imagine if someone was holding a focus mitt in alignment with this knee. And then when I pivot, the focus mitt is aligned with this knee, right? So I'm not, in this exercise, I'm not hitting to center. I'm forcing myself to hit past center. And see, there's no way I can do that with wrist alone. I have to be turning my body, rotating my shoulders to be able to hit in line with this knee. So if my partner was holding my focus pad, it'd be smack the focus pad. Smack the focus pad on this side. Bam, 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 bam. So this is the other way to practice that pivot with the weapon. A big motion. If I'm facing him this way, again, so my arm is up, and I'm turning. Bam, 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 and I'd be hitting with the flat of the stick. If it was a blade, the flat of the blade, the side of the stick. Boom, same thing here, side of the stick. Boom, 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 boom. And if Bob was my target, I'd be standing in front of Bob, and I'd be going bam, 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 bam. So you can tell I can generate a lot of torque and acceleration in the stick that way. And it can be fast, right? But work it this way. Boom, 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 okay? Then we're gonna work it this way. I can go on a horizontal plane, right? And I can go on a vertical plane, like this. So now again, I'm not striking to center, I'm striking a focus pad aligned with my knee. Bam, bam. So now I'm on the vertical plane. Bam, 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 bam. And just for convenience sake, I'm assuming this is something at about hip level. Hip or elbow, elbow level. Like his weapon out in front of me, an arm out in front of me. Pow, 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 pow. See, I'm making that full shift. Boom. Because I want to be able to really work that shift where that hip coming across. Boom is my power generation. That hip coming across. Boom. Boom is my power generation. Boom. 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 Okay, now let's do combinations. I did top, 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 down, down, down. What if I do in this way, down this way? In, down. Again, focus pad here, focus pad here. Bam, 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 bam. So up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Right? And again, these are big motions because I want to generate that power. As we can do this, then we start shortening it and refining it, making it faster and tighter. But for now, work it this way. Bam, 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 bam. Okay? Then I can flip it to the other side. I could be on this side and go down here. So now my focus pad is here and here, right? Bam, 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 pop, 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 pop. So obviously I could do bam, bam, up here a couple of times, boom, and I'm on back to this side, boom, 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 a couple of times, boom, 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 and then I'm back to this side. Down here a couple of times, and then back up to here. Boom, boom, back down, back up, down, up, down, boom, 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 boom. So practice, just play with that, flowing from this line to this line. Okay, and from the side, I've got bam, 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 bam. And then I've got boom, 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 boom. And then I mix them. Boom, 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 pop, boom, 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 boom. Okay? So practice that. We can also do this plane, did it this way like windshield wiper, right? We can also go on the frontal plane, this way, right? Boom. So this is not a strike coming back. There's no way I can stretch all the way up and hit him with that from below. I'd be really flexible if I could do that. But it's that coming down, and later we'll see that coming up is a deflection. So it has value. But the main, what we're talking about here is that descending strike, right? So I would be, let's see, get it going, bam, bam. See how I'm pivoting that way so I can drop into the strike. And then pivot, it comes back up. I can start at my shoulder, it can start here, it doesn't really matter, but drop. And this would be like I'm dropping it down on the guy's wrist or hand, right? Pow, pop. Pivot, back. See, when I come back, I'm not necessarily doing a full pivot now. I'm just recovering so I can pivot, recover, pivot, recover, pivot, recover, pivot, recover, pivot, recover. Boom, 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 boom. And again, see, it's in line with my knee. Boom, 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 boom. Okay? If I can do it downward on this side, I can do it downward on this side as well, right? Boop. And again, I can't come all the way back up like that. So it's coming down, hitting with the flat, like this. Again, in line with my knee. And this one, I'm turning this way, right? See how my hip turning and dropping powers the strike? I'm gonna come up. Pow, 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 pow. And just because the angle of my arm, I can't do it straight out, puts a weird torque in my wrist, so I end up kind of coming down at a bit of an angle, and that's just natural. It helps protect your wrist, right? So I'm coming down, boom, and again that would be coming down on his wrist, his arm, shoulder, boom, 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 boom. So I can put that now into this kind of thing, right? Boom, boom, bam, bam, pow, back up, boom, boom, bam, bam, boom, pow, back up, boom, 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 pop, 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 pow, pow, pop. You see how this coming right back to this, and this can come right back to this, right? So put those into those combinations now. Boom, pop, 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 boom, pop, 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 and really work that pivot and get that hand going for these strikes, all these various targets, okay? Now, it goes without saying, if I can go across, I can go straight down, I could have done that on a diagonal line, 45 degrees, right? Pow! And I could have come up on a diagonal line, pow! Right? Boom, boom. This diagonal line doesn't really work because as I'm coming down, I don't want to do this weird motion, which is where we end up turning out and doing some of our other strikes, okay? But the core of what we do is going to be that fanning motion, the Abaniko. Now let me show you something else. This pivot, I call the wide pivot. That's primarily what we use in peekaboo martial boxing. With a weapon, we can also do something I call the narrow pivot, which is less useful for the empty hand, but is very useful with the stick. And the narrow pivot is where I'm turning this way, like so. So now, instead of planting this foot and pivoting on the ball of this foot, where my rear leg is turning, I'm planting this foot, pivoting the ball of this foot, and my lead leg is turning, right? This heel going this way, or this heel going this way. And you'll notice the exact same thing is happening at my hip. If I turn like this, torquing my hip, pushing this side forward. If I turn like this, boom, I'm technically pulling this hip back, which essentially pushes this side forward. So my hip, my action for power generation from here up is almost exactly the same whether I pivot like this or whether I pivot like this, right? Pow, 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 pow. Can you see that? So this is an important pivot. Now we probably wouldn't do it empty hand. Maybe there'll be a use for it, but we can use it a lot with the stick when we're trying to be fast and evasive, okay? So again, if I'm here, then I turn on the ball of my foot, and this one's pivoting this way. And then I turn and put this one down, and this one pivots. So my hips are torquing. Boom, and I gotta throw my heel out, just like I did with the other one. But now it's just this heel. Okay, so now you can go back and do everything we just covered as far as developing that fanning strike, that Abaniko, but do it with this pivot, the narrow pivot, as well as the wide pivot, right? So watch. Bam, 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 bam. Bam, 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 pow, bam, 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 pow, bop, 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 pow. Should be that one. Pow, pow, pop, 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 pop. Okay, I'm here, I'll hit Bob, and I want to hit him again, boom, I can do that, right, to still generate here. If I pivoted this way, it would bring me back towards Bob. What if I want to keep going away from Bob? I pivot this way, and I pivot like that, boom, I've gone away, I've kept myself out from under, in front of him, and then I just step and keep going. So later, just as a preview, we'll do pivot, 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 pivot. All right, let me start it from over here. Pivot, 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 pivot. Okay, but that's for a later lesson. I just want you to see how that narrow pivot is going to fit in with the wide pivot and everything else we're going to do. But the primary thing right now to work on is knowing the guard. Now I should mention the body spacing. Remember Let feet are about shoulder width. I've got about, you can see, heel on this line, toe on this line, about 1 board width, maybe 2 at the most. I'm trying to keep my upper body square so I can move symmetrically. I don't want to be bladed, which is the stance we would use in the out-fighting range, not at the in-fighting range, okay? So keep that in mind. Practice the guard transitions, either foot forward. Practice that pivot, and then add those fanning strikes to the pivot, and then practice this pivot. And add the fanning strikes to that pivot. All right, and I think that's probably enough for lesson 1.